All right, this feels like it could be dumb, it could be great, but I want to do a redo of a video that I had already made about Tycho Nestoris. And so this is going to be explaining Tycho's journey from Castle Black to the Crofters Village, aka Stannis' camp. And there's a number of things I've written about this years ago in my essays, but I must be a horrible writer or a horrible thinker, because nobody really responded or took to the ideas that I presented, even though they still, all these years later, feel really sound. And again, I'm trying to save most of the big speculative stuff for other things, so I'm going to focus on what seem like valid inferences as opposed to large, like, well, it must be this. Anyways, so what do we know about Tycho? I mean, we know he's the Braavosi banker with the crazy hat that comes to Castle Black. He first arrives at Castle Black with Selyse and the rest of her entourage, which would be like Axel Florent and all of her knights, which have those ridiculous names. And first thing that we really notably see happen with him is that John takes him aside and says, "Hey, I'd like to pick your brain about some stuff." And of course, Tycho listens to him. They go to his chambers, and Tycho hears out that John basically wants to use these ships, his other ships, to go rescue people at Hardhome. And this is really funny to me because I have to talk a little bit about a tangent because it's relevant to establishing Tycho's character. So Tycho, when he's listening to John, what he's not talking about is the possibility that the Braavosi already know about Hardhome and what's going on up there. Because in another chapter with Arya, you know, she's doing her little spying work for, the Kindly Old Man and the House of Black and White. And she comes back with news from Ragman Harbor, or the Purple Harbor, one of the two, saying that, oh, the Sea Lords captured this ship. And it's one of the Laseni galleys that picked up women and children. And they were going to make slaves out of them. The other ship didn't get caught by the Braavosi and escaped. And they think that they're going to go back to capture more of these women and children that are back up at Hardhome. Okay, so that's pretty established. Now, what's not established is whether or not the Iron Bank is connected to the Faceless Men. I feel like that kind of makes sense because if you follow the history of Braavos, one of the key things about Braavos is that, like, the founders have these like special keys. They were called key holders, the people who had them, and they like wore them around their neck or something like that. And anyways, the Kindly Old Man uses such a key to open up those super secret dark chambers where the faces are. So it seems like perhaps they're related, or at least the face men are incredibly influential. And it seems like if it's not the Iron Bank owns the Faceless Men, why wouldn't it be the other? You'd think the Faceless Men would love to have that if they wanted. But in any case, it's kind of irrelevant. The real question is, does Tycho Nestoris know all of this? Does he know about the women and children on Hardhome and what they need? And what makes this really fascinating is much later in the books, we obviously know John works out this deal with Tycho, and the Braavosi ships go up with Cotter Pike to Hardhome, and Cotter Pike sends a letter back at one point saying, "Oh man, everything's going to hell. It's crazy up here. Dead things in the water." And anyways, in that particular letter, one of the things that he says is that the witch women on the beach are calling them slavers because the Braavosi will only take women and children. That's almost, obviously I'm driving right now, so I can't verify it, but that's almost verbatim what he says. And the reason that this is interesting is because the connotation is clear that only the Braavosi have this issue with only taking women and children. Like, it sounds pretty clear from the context that Cotter's basically saying, well, look, we'll take anybody, but the Braavosi are only taking women and children, and that's what's pissing off these witch people. And it's really interesting that the Braavosi would sort of opt to go for women and children when the Castle Black, or sorry, the Eastwatch folks don't seem to have that particular like selectiveness. And it would make sense that the only reason they're being that selective is because they're worried about slaves, or future slavers coming. And it also is kind of hilarious because it just goes to the way prophecy works in this in the books. Meaning, what if these witch women did have a vision that slavers were going to come and take the women and children? And of course, they picked the wrong group to drop that accusation on. It was actually the Liceni that were the slavers, but they lay it at the wrong group. That's like verbatim his Martin's style with how he does these things. So anyways, what I'm getting at is there's a very real possibility that Tycho already had planned on sending ships up to rescue these people, but he managed to get John to pay him to do it. Because you also have to wonder, why did he take 3 ships across the narrow sea just to see Stannis? That seems a bit absurd, and I can't recall, but I think John even asks him about it, and Tycho basically says, oh, he's kind of cagey. He says, oh, you can't be too safe. But why not have one ship that's 3 times as structurally sound as opposed to 3 pieces of shit? That just seems like a pretty weak argument. And besides, if your ship got destroyed on rocks or in a storm, good luck to any ship that tries to rescue you. Anyways, it seems like Tycho basically profits due to his secrecy, due to his foresight. He profits from taking advantage of things that he knows are happening elsewhere in the world. So what happens to him after that? The next thing we know is that John encounters Tycho, I think, at dinner. This is perhaps the reception for Alice Karstark's wedding to Sigorn of Then. It's the reception down in the cellar and whatever building it is. And anyways, Axel Florent approaches John while he's talking to Tycho, and Axel Florent turns this into an opportunity to start asking a bunch of questions about Val. He's like, where's Val? Where's this wildling princess I've heard about? I want to find her. And Tycho quickly excuses himself and goes to leave, but basically you have to wonder just how much of this does Tycho overhear? How much does he obviously know? Because if he traveled with them, then what Axel's saying about how, like, where's this wildling princess we've all heard about? That means Tycho knows about it too. And if he doesn't see her in evidence anywhere, he might come to the same conclusion that she's not there. That's just an interesting side thing to note, that Tycho might have this knowledge. I just wanted to put that out there. We're doing things chronologically, not in order of like importance to when they become relevant. So it's just, you put like a little pin in that, and we'll come back to it later. But anyways, what we do know is that Tycho eventually travels with some escorts from Castle Black to Deepwood Mont. He's trying to get to Stannis, but the last thing they know is that he was at Deepwood Mont, so they go there. What we don't know is what really happens in the interim. All we know is that he leaves, goes to Deepwood Mont based on the fact that he has all the other Ironborn from there. Then he goes like he's going to catch up to Stannis. However, he manages to arrive at Stannis' camp with Arya and Theon, who were sent to the camp by Moors, which it just seems really... that seems weird. Like, he would have bypassed the camp to run into them and then backtrack back to the camp. That seems a bit absurd. So that's his general, that's like the skeleton outline of his movements. What I want to do now is explain some of the more weird things. The first of which is, why did Tycho free the Ironborn at Deepwood Mont? Because you have to acknowledge that those Ironborn captives were really Stannis' captives. He says as much in the letter he wrote to John. He says that, the Ironborn, we will hang them, or we will ransom those of high birth. There's weird things about that letter, but that's what he says. So nominally they're Stannis's. And aside from that, even if they're not Stannis's, they are in Sybil Glover's custody, which, if they're in Sybil Glover's custody, you have to wonder, why would she be willing to give up Ironborn hostages? Because Sybil Glover, her only real motivation right now is to get her children back, which are in 10 towers in the Iron Islands. They're hostages of Ironborn, so it would make sense. It would make sense that it would be awfully foolish for her to give up her Ironborn for nothing. Like, for nothing. Like, there's no conceivable reason why she would do that, right? Unless it's somehow related to her getting her children back. And how could that possibly work? Well, the way this works, in my opinion, is because you have to wonder why Tycho would want the Ironborn. I think a fair question is, did Tycho want the Ironborn when he first got to Deepwood Mott? I would say the answer to that is obviously not, because it's almost a complete certainty that he had no idea about Ironborn captives when he got there. So what changed? What changed when he was at Deepwood that convinced him to take Ironborn hostages of low to middling birth and therefore political capital value to Stannis? Like, why would he take them with him when he already had escorts from Castle Black that were more or less more trustworthy? The answer to that question is, what new information could Tycho have learned while he was in Deepwood Mott? And the answer to what new information could he have learned, it's actually pretty cool when you think about it. What he could learn comes straight from Tris Botley. Tris Botley is the one who remembered the Torgon Grey Iron story and how it could be used to invalidate Euron's win at the Kingsmoot. So that would be, it's a pretty amazing, wow, this could be used to legitimately undermine from afar Euron's crown. Because not only does Tris know about this story about Torgon Grey Iron, but Tris was there when Asha read the letter from Ramsay saying, "I send you each a piece of prince. Linger in my lands and share his fate." Or basically, the letter basically proves that Theon was there, and Tris basically says, "Yeah, I know this. Carl the Maid was there too. They both witnessed the letter being read. Plus, the letter was not burned or destroyed. We don't know for sure." Asha literally thrusts it into the Maester's hands when the Maester asks if he could tell Sybil about this news. So not only that, Sybil knows about Theon being alive. So all it would take is her knowing that Theon's alive, any visit to the cells where Tris and Carl both desperately want to get out, and they're smart enough, Tris especially, smart enough to leverage this into a ploy to get them out of jail. It just might work. And especially, that would really sell well on Tycho. I mean, it makes sense. That's why he'd take him. Especially since if Sybil, this also explains why Sybil might be willing to go along with this, because this is a chance to possibly get her children back. It's all directly connected. It's tied together. So the next thing is, we know that he ends up leaving, and he takes his escort of men from Castle Black, and he also takes the Ironborn, and eventually somehow he gets Arya and Theon. And then when he shows up at Stannis' camp, he says, "I've brought you gifts," or a gift. And you can kind of, it's interchangeable, because he could be either talking about one gift being one particular person, or a gift being everybody, or if he says gifts, it would be everybody. But the point is, everybody that he brings, other than himself and his escort from Castle Black, they're there to provide services and benefits to Stannis. Now, what makes this really funny and interesting is the fact that we don't get to see much of the conversation between Tycho and Stannis. Like, we don't really get to see any of it. Basically, Theon wakes up with Stannis basically being pissed and saying, "You're a worse pirate than Salador San." I think that's like about the only part he hears, other than him bitching about having to sign the contract. And anyways, this is where I take a pin out of that topic about Val, because one thing that Tycho could have done is he could have told Stannis about Val being gone. And without getting into too much speculation, if you see my other videos about Val and other things related to wildlings, Val seems to be a key part of his control over the wildlings. So for her to be gone, that's kind of a sign that maybe some ploy he had entertained using wildlings might be off the table, because again, he doesn't know he doesn't know the conditions under which she was not at Castle Black. Now, there's another thing that we didn't witness, but might have happened. Stannis could have also been informed about the Torgon Grey Iron thing from Tycho, had he known about it. And again, I want to stop here and just point out that we don't really know for sure that Tycho knows about the Torgon Grey Iron thing. It seems basically improbable that he, as a Braavosi, would know about ancient inheritance customs for the Ironborn. But it does seem plausible that Carl the Maid and Tris Botley would, if they had a chance, tell anybody who would listen to them about how that could help everybody involved. And that if Tycho heard this, he might be pretty swayed. And I mean, it's perhaps the only sensible explanation for why he would need extra Ironborn to escort him. And it also, in my opinion, explains why he calls it a gift when he provides them all. Now, what Stannis does with all of this information and these Ironborn and whether or not that really happens, that's really speculative. I don't want to keep going. But I think at this point, it's a fair assessment of Tycho, his journey, and his character. You know, one thing I do want to say that involves loosely about my speculations is that I do believe that when Stannis is pissed off at Tycho and says he's a worse pirate, I think part of it might be because Tycho knows that Val was important, and somehow he can exploit that for profit, because in a way that just gets the Iron Bank more control. I don't really know for sure on that. That's not even really a core component, but it's an interesting aspect. The more interesting aspect is the fact that he probably figured out the Torgon Grey Iron story from the other Ironborn, and that's why they're there. Anyways, that's enough. I should probably focus on driving.